He is Mike Jones, a very popular guest on the mother of all talk shows, and I'm glad to welcome him again this evening. Mike, pretty dramatic events. Tell us how it was for you. Did the earth move at the same time as it moved for the rest of us? When did you learn of what had happened, and what are people saying?
Thanks again for having me, Mr. Galloway. I'll correct the record. I'm actually in Moscow. That's
Okay.
where I was today. I've moved there now from St. Petersburg. So
Even
yeah, I was in
better.
the thick of it today. Yeah, I was in the thick of it today, and I was at the Red Square not long ago, where you'll note the 9th of March Victory Day parade preparations are already there. They featured in the footage of this drone strike today. I learned of this event around afternoon when it was reported. And the attack itself, I won't go into too many details. I'm sure the viewers are aware of many of the sort of basics there. Really quite amateurish by the looks of it. There was some conflicting words used in the news reports that I've reported on, where they say how the drone was disabled. People are believing that what was disabled was the guidance system as opposed to the explosives, because there was quite clearly an explosion. If this was an attempt on President Putin's life, as the Russian media is sort of claiming, well, it was pretty sloppy. It's not a surprise that Kiev has denied any responsibility for this, but it's not likely, really, in many people's view, that this could be a false flag attack. That's been another theory that certainly people have commented on, that this is being used as some form of justification by Russia. I don't really give that theory too much credence, given the fact that one of the measures taken by the government in Moscow was to ban any and all use of drones. So I believe the Russians have enough evidence to believe that this drone took off in Russian territory, very close to the Kremlin, was likely piloted by saboteurs, or at least set on its course by SBU operatives. I think that's the official theory. What's more concerning for me than anything else is now the almost violent rhetoric that's coming out of pretty prominent voices. We have Vyacheslav Volodin, who is one of the State Duma representatives. He is now calling Kiev a terrorist state, pretty much asking for the gloves to come off now. And of course, right up there, as always, Dmitry Medvedev, who even is going so far as to call for the removal of Zelensky. He's saying how Hitler was not required to sign the surrender of Nazi Germany, so why should Zelensky be preserved? There's then commentary that this breaches an almost unspoken agreement between Moscow and the West, because remember, we're dealing with the West, not just with Ukraine here, about not attacking political leaders. We know this story from the Israeli ambassador when he visited Zelensky and assured Zelensky that he was not under threat, despite the air raid sirens that went off theatrically for Joe Biden. So it's always been a kind of unwritten rule that certainly Zelensky wouldn't be targeted. With this attack, which is believed to target Putin, there's now calls for the gloves to come off. And I have seen a notification this evening that Kiev, among 9 other regions, have now sounded an air raid alert.
Yes, of course, there are air raids alerts very regularly. There's a lot of air raids. The question is, what are the targets? Because Russia has not attacked the vital state organs of the Kiev government. Still less have they attacked the president, Zelensky. And as you rightly say, the former prime minister of Israel assured Zelensky that Putin had assured him that Zelensky's life was not at risk. Although, of course, things can happen by accident. It ain't no accident when you land 2 drones on top of the Kremlin. Let me play devil's advocate with you. There's not much doubt that it was a terrorist act if it was launched inside Russian territory, as you more or less confirm it must have been, by saboteurs, and it landed on the rooftop twice of the heart of Russian government. That's a terrorist attack, and the state that sponsored it can quite obviously be described as a terrorist state. Ditto, What else but an assassination attempt can it be if you land two explosive drones on the roof of the building in which, at least nominally, Vladimir Putin lives and works? Now, we're told that they would say that anyway, that Putin wasn't in the building, that he works and presumably lives somewhere else. But the person who launched the attack could not know that. I mean, you could, if you launched an attack on the Lincoln bedroom and Joe Biden was sleeping in another bedroom, he wouldn't be able to claim it wasn't a terrorist attack, it wasn't an assassination attempt, because I wasn't in that bedroom. It would be quite obviously an assassination attempt. So if you've got a terrorist attempt by a neighboring state to assassinate your leader, what else but taking the gloves off could Russia possibly do?
There's the other idea that this is a sort of symbolic attack, but yeah, I believe the intentions are pretty clear here, of what was meant to be achieved. This is actually an embarrassment for the Russian authorities. Russian television has been fairly tight-lipped. They haven't, from what I'm told, given it too much coverage, which is quite understandable, because it doesn't matter how you cut it. This is a strike, as you've said, deep in the heart of the Russian Federation, almost trying to cut the head off the government there. So it's still a bit of a failing that this even occurred at all, in regards to the Russian authorities. And you're right, like I say, this rhetoric now coming out of taking the gloves off, there was even talk of threats up into nuclear weapons. We've already had some talk, of Belarus hosting these nuclear weapons on behalf of the Russian Federation. We have had similar talk before, and especially we saw it with General Surovikin when he unleashed a wave of missiles against Ukraine and Kiev in particular, cutting the power. I'm not sure really. I'm quite concerned really as to what options we have left. Defense Minister Shoigu warned about this. He said we're going up the ratchet in the steps, but there aren't many steps left. And he's trying to really ram that message home to the West. We've already had it said before, you're playing with fire. This really is quite a reckless and irresponsible attack by the Kiev regime. And whilst they've denied it, I've already seen designs of postage stamps to commemorate this event that they also claim they had nothing to do with, which seems rather odd to me.
They did the same with the Kerch Bridge, of course. They said that the Russians had blown up the Kerch Bridge themselves, but they made a postage stamp of the explosion anyway. They, of course, helped to spread the lie that Russia had blown up the Nord Stream. And now they're implying that something, I'll go further than you, deeply embarrassing for Russia that this happened. That's why I said earlier, in former times, trust me, I knew those times very well. The military people in charge of the security over Moscow would already have been shot dead in the Lubyanka, because this is a gigantic embarrassment for Russia. And I've no doubt that's why the TV is playing it down, because it's a national embarrassment. I could go further, but I don't want to rub it in. It is therefore likely, I mean, any way you dice it, it has to mean further escalation, Mike, doesn't it?
It does. We've now having these talks of the beginning of this much vaunted Ukrainian counteroffensive, and I believe perhaps even that's part of it. This may even be a signal to the elements of the SBU that things are kicking off. Prigozhin today has warned that the active phase of the Ukrainian counteroffensive is due to begin. Zelensky himself in Finland today also hinted about it, whereas he was banging his begging bowl for F-16 fighters. He was talking about this counteroffensive coming on. So I think maybe Russia has launched some preemptive strikes to try and keep this counteroffensive, if it ever does take place, at bay. Whether we now see the mobilized troops that we've not yet heard from for a long time activated, possibly even coming down from Belarus, as Kiev has feared and the West has feared for a long time. We don't know. Unfortunately, it's all speculation at this point. But the one thing I will say that kind of reassures me is that Russia has always been patient, calm, and calculated, and not emotional and not reactionary in a knee-jerk fashion. They have often launched retaliatory strikes, and the Ministry of Defense has stated as such, but usually they're not knocked out of their plan. Shoigu as well has often stated this, that they won't be keeping to any schedule of anyone else but their own, and they will achieve their objectives in their time. Whether they have to do something political to placate the people, like Medvedev, like State Duma Representative Volodin, to try and give them some reassurance as well that there is an answer for this, we shall see in the coming days, I'm sure.
Yeah, trust in the process, as people used to tell me about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer's disastrous period as manager of Manchester United, but I digress. What's going to happen with the military parade? Just for the international viewers, this is arguably the highlight of Russian public life. It is in commemoration of the world historic role of the Red Army, the USSR, Russia as the successor state, its role in defeating Hitler fascism, liberating Berlin from the jackboot of Nazism, which killed best part of 100 million people around the world, including many millions of people in Europe. If not for Russia, that kind of regime might well still be in power in Germany and throughout Europe, and by extension throughout the world. So a pretty big deal. It's the victory parade. Will it go ahead? And will President Putin be there?
I believe it will go ahead. As you say, it's kind of a linchpin of the society. The only thing that has been cut back on is this really wonderful tradition of the March of the Immortal Regiment, which perhaps people in the West aren't as aware of, where people take pictures of their fallen ancestors who gave their lives for us in the Great Patriotic War, and they commemorate them. Usually this is a physical march through the streets, but in some regions such as Belgrade and Bryansk that have suffered attacks recently, these have now been shifted, as they were in the pandemic, to online fashion, where people can upload pictures of their relatives that they lost in the war. So that is one concession given current events, but I don't believe that the Russians could get away with stopping Victory Day. Ideally, it will be also mixed with the capture of Artyomsk, Bakhmut, but again, I wouldn't see Prigozhin costing lives just for a symbolic win for Victory Day. And I know the West is doing everything they can to deny Russia that inevitable victory there. But yeah, the 9th of May is a huge deal, and people are very much looking forward to it. And I myself hope to be in the Four Seasons Hotel to watch it take place.
Now, you mentioned Mr. Medvedev. He's been the prime minister. He's been the president. Who knows? He might be the prime minister, president again. He's still a very powerful figure in the National Security Council. When I knew him before, I would have characterized him as, how shall I put it in a way that isn't insulting? A mouse. But he's now a lion. He's now the man who makes the strongest statements, ferocious statements, like the one today to which you alluded. Has he, as it were, experienced a road to Damascus conversion, or is he playing the outrider? Does he have elections in mind? What's your informed speculation about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. He's kind of undergone this transition or transformation whereby he was more of an advocate for dealing with the West before, quite liberal in his views. And then suddenly one of the most bellicose commentators on events, really saber rattling, often trolling as well, as he did, had a bit of banter with Elon Musk, Comrade Musk, as he called him. I even read an article the other day talking about how much President Putin has done for Russia. And it even claimed that Medvedev was given the thankless task of playing this role as the sort of appeaser of the West to buy time for Russia, to make it look to the West like there was an advocate for them, there was a friend of the West inside Russia. Quite how true that is, I don't know, but possibly with he's quite a cunning man. People have to understand he's incredibly intelligent. He's a lawyer, like Putin, actually, by education, and he's very careful with his words and mindful of them. And like we've seen with Sergei Lavrov as well, these are razor sharp minds. So I wouldn't say that. I would be guessing, but I do wonder actually if that is the case, where they've used kind of this smoke and mirrors and deception for this point in time, which was invariably
hard
going
cop,
to come.
soft cop routine, yeah?
Yeah, yeah, I can actually entertain that idea.
Now, Oliver Stone, the great Hollywood
Mm.
film director responsible for some of the greatest movies of our time, has a new one coming out on the nuclear question. And in the course of promoting it, he made the point, I think yesterday, I read it today, that Putin is a great leader whose people love him. Now, you've been on the ground in St. Petersburg and now in Moscow. His achievements cannot be gainsaid in terms of the transformation of the Russian economy, Russian prestige, and so on over the last 20 years, and the modernization of the Russian military. But do the people love him, in your opinion?
Yeah, of course, this is split across demographics. I think the most people that truly appreciate all the changes are, of course, those who were born in the Soviet Union, who suffered the pains of the collapse and have seen just how far the country has come. Well, since being on its knees, being raped by Yeltsin and Clinton and all this, and the people suffered for that. Those people, I believe, do truly value. It's the younger generation, of course, who aren't quite as appreciative of all the wonderful systems that they have, the roads, the infrastructure, the healthcare system, that even by comparison to the NHS, I'm in awe of, especially even the private healthcare, and its commensurably low cost, even to the UK. So there's a lot for Russians to be proud of, and even on in the population, where Russia had a terrible, I think it was deficit of like 1.5 million population decline, has now been reduced down to tens of thousands thanks to these social programs and financial support for the family. So it's mainly the older generation who value it, and the younger ones they're coming around, I believe, now with recent events and the West showing its true colors.
Yeah, well, youth is wasted on the young. I've always thought that. Last question, Mike. Going to bed soon. Are people nervous about what might happen during the night? Are people fearful after this attack on the Kremlin?
No, I don't believe so. I th the This is going to put a lot of pressure on President Putin. He's already had his critics. He's already had people like we've seen with Medvedev, who want to get it done and get it done now. A lot of impatience. They think Russia should have been much harder, faster, stronger from the offset. None of this goodwill gesture falling back from Kiev. It should have all been very much over and done with, for the sake of the people of Donbass, who have gone through enough at the hands of these criminals already. So I am going to be paying a lot of attention to Putin in the coming days, and maybe even his spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, to see perhaps what is said and how they maneuver now politically, because it is going to create a lot of pressure and a lot of anger from people, politically, pride-wise, as we approach Victory Day.
Mike Jones, as always, a pleasure to receive your wisdom. Stay safe and come back on the show soon. Mike Jones, formerly of St. Petersburg, now of Moscow, a journalist and English expat living and working in Russia.